World of Warcraft is an incredible game for so many reasons. The gameplay, the story, and those graphics. But back in the day, it was also a game that had amazing customer support. Meet the Game Masters, the overworked, underpaid support staff that were there to field player questions. You could ask them pretty much anything from, dude, where's my fishing rod, to help, this quest is super bugged. And I ought to know because from 2011 to 2012, I worked for Blizzard Entertainment as a game master at their offices in Austin, Texas. Most of the time, it was just hanging out, helping people playing their favorite video game. But between all the fun tickets of helping someone with a quest or getting their character unstuck, there were dozens, if not hundreds of tickets that made me want to pull my hair out. Crazy tickets. Insane tickets. Tickets that still keep me up at night more than a decade later. That's why today I'm gonna spill the tea on everything, and I mean everything about working at Blizzard as a game master. I'm gonna go into excruciating detail about everything. The interview process, the onboarding, the tools, the perks, the work environment itself, the layoffs, and even the day that I got canned. And just being completely honest with you guys, I don't know if the powers that be are going to be too happy with me giving this peek behind the curtain here. So if you have an interest in this particular topic, then I recommend you watch this video now before Blizzard has a chance to make it or me go away. I didn't fall down those stairs. Anyway, I'm making this video for two reasons. The first is that I just want to preserve as much of this stuff as I can before I forget anymore. It's been more than a decade since I worked there, and every day that passes, more and more of my brain gets taken up by reality television. And God knows that it's only a matter of time before every gaming memory I have is replaced by Gordon Ramsay memes. And reason number two, and by far much more important, is that I want to help folks understand just how special and important game masters were for the World of Warcraft. The tech support landscape is changing, and not just for Blizzard Entertainment, but the entire gaming industry, the entire world of technology. We all know that AI and automated support systems are on the rise. But back in the day, WoW game masters were someone that you could go to for problems, and they tried their best to help players out in a fun and friendly and engaging way. I think that work is worth remembering, celebrating, even the crazy tickets. No, especially the crazy tickets. So that's what we're doing today. My name is Clyde, and welcome to this very special holiday-themed episode of Blizzard is Not Your Friend. And because it's the holidays, I think it's only fair that we put on a fun costume. So here we go!
Oh, God. What have I done? What have I done? I'm great!
You're a mean one, Mr. Stash. You poke fun with ruthless glee. Your videos dunk on companies because they're not so friendly, Mr. Stash. You're a silly gamer, mad at expensive re-release.
This'll come off, right?
The Game Master interview. How do you tie your shoes? So you wanna be a game master. So the application process was fairly normal, but the interview itself was very much not. Let me explain. It all started off because back in the day, I was browsing Blizzard's job portal looking at job listings, and I saw a customer support role listed in Austin, Texas, where I was living at the time. I thought to myself, hey, I like Blizzard video games. Me am tuck pretty good. So why not toss in an application and see where it goes? So I submitted my resume online, which I promise you was not anything special or fancy. Mostly customer servicey roles at such fine establishments as Papa John's and Taco Bell. But in my cover letter, I wrote about the passion I had for the world of gaming, my interest in Blizzard's titles. And luck was apparently on my side because just a couple weeks later, I got a call from a hiring manager and they were asking me to interview. Now, the day of the interview, I got sent a location for their building located in North Austin. And because I don't want to get them doxxed, I am not going to give street names or neighborhoods. But I will point out that curiously, the outside of the building was totally unmarked. There was no name on the side of it, no label, certainly no reference to Blizzard Entertainment. It is very clear to me they don't want to draw attention to this particular building. And I also know they've received legitimate threats of violence in the past, so that makes sense to me. But anyway, I walked into the lobby, I gawked at some of the cool gaming artwork on the walls, and the receptionist ferried me away to one of the side rooms to wait for my interview. And that was where I sat and waited. Just a nerdy dude in his early 20s, absolutely bricking it for an interview with Blizzard Entertainment. 5 minutes later, later, a guy came in who introduced himself as one of the team leads on the floor, and the interview began. And honestly, I don't remember a whole lot about the early portions of this interview. It was mostly normal, pretty tame stuff like, how would you handle conflict in the workplace? Or, have you ever been fired? But in the second half, that's where things got real interesting, because the questions shifted away from my background and towards more practical exercises. And one of those prompts that still sticks out in my memory today is simply, tell me how to tie my shoes. And make no mistake, this prompt is a trap. There are many correct responses to this prompt, but the one thing they didn't want to hear was someone saying, dude, you just wrap the laces up. And that's because this question isn't a test of someone's patience or their intelligence. It's really about evaluating a person's ability to coach them through a simple process. They wanted to hear a very simple, very clear, direct explanation. Something like, you start with the shoe in front of you, you take your left lace in your left hand, your right lace in your right hand, you make a crisscross, and so on and so forth. And I totally get it. In 2024, this question might seem dumb or even obvious. But I promise you, back in the day, this prompt prevented many an applicant from becoming game masters. And cards on the table, this prompt might actually be a very common tech support, IT interview question. I don't know, because Blizzard was really my one and only IT style role. But fortunately for me, the day of the interview, I answered the question to that team lead's satisfaction, and I moved forward in their onboarding process. It was time to start becoming a game master.
Posey, 10 hours straight. He's a machine.
Whoa, I know how to ban people.
Show me.
Onboarding and getting your robes. So you've got the job, and most people think they're in the clear at that point. You're gonna be a game master. Yay!
But don't get too excited.
Because Blizzard's 2-week onboarding process involved daily quizzes, knowledge checks, and a final exam. And if you weren't able to keep up, they were not afraid to drop you. When I started there in 2011, they hired Tier 1 Game Masters in groups of 10 to 15 people. And I am not exaggerating when I say that of my new hire group, less than 10 made it to the floor. Let me add some context. You and I, we're gamers. We know how video games work. And crucially, we know how MMORPGs like World of Warcraft work. We understand the core mechanics and systems of the game. But I'm not exaggerating when I tell you, there were people in my new hire class that were not gamers. These were people that didn't really have experience with WoW at all. And I'm not gonna lie, I felt for them. Just imagine how difficult it would be to try and play catch up on concepts like player characters and inventories and reputation systems and honor points and battlegrounds. All the while you're trying to memorize the differences and nuances between a Severity 2 and Severity 3 abusive language violation, while you are trying to learn which tools are even appropriate for which types of tickets. And don't worry, I'm going to get into the nitty-gritty of the policies here in a bit when I talk about the actual job itself. But just know that even for gamers coming to this job, there was a lot to absorb. Anyway, if you and your fellow new hires made it through 2 weeks of tests and onboarding, then you'd get together and have a mini celebration where you are all given your Game Master robes and you pick out your Game Master name. And this was all done on a server that was spun up for the purposes of training, so there was no risk of a newbie Game Master despawning a critical NPC somewhere or wreaking havoc on some server's economy. And on the topic of Game Master names, I will say some people got to pick them out, but the vast majority were just assigned. The only hard and fast rule that I knew was that it had to be something that returned no results in Google. They didn't want a Game Master name being associated with something else out in the world. I was hoping I'd be assigned a name that was cool, like Game Master Raxelroar or Draken Brawl or something cool like that. But the name that I was given, and I kid you not, was Game Master Nildris. Nildris? Nildris? Come on, it sounds like the name of a cute old babushka lady from Russia. And fun fact, if you Google my Game Master name, there are still tickets floating around that I handled back in the day. So yay me for doing my job. What was the job like? I'm going to go ahead and separate this section into two parts. The job itself, which is to say the kinds of tickets, the tools, the workflows, the policies, and the work environment itself, which is to say what it was like to actually work at Blizzard Entertainment as a Game Master. Let's knock out the latter. Each team sat together on the floor and they started and stopped their shifts at the same time. If you were lucky, you had a schedule where you actually got to see daylight outside. But if you were unlucky, you were assigned a very late overnight schedule. And those shifts had me feeling like a vampire.
Your skin is pale white and ice cold. You never eat or drink anything. You don't go out in the sunlight.
I know what you are. Your tech support. Ah!
You're goddamn right.
WoW was and still is very much a global game, so tickets came in around the clock. Just because the queue of tickets was low when you started your shift, depending on what happened over those 8 hours, it could be a totally different story when you signed out for the day. Anyway, in these teams of 10 or so game masters, there was always 6 to 7 tier 1s, 2 to 3 tier 2s, and a team lead. This was the basic structure that was replicated for every team on the floor, regardless of the shift they had. And it wasn't just gamers working there. There was parents and college kids, people who wanted to get their foot in the door in the gaming industry, people there just for a paycheck. It was a nice mix, and I met a lot of really cool people working there. Shout out to my friends Kenny, Scott, and Chase. I would not have hung around Blizzard nearly half as long if y'all hadn't been there in the trenches with me. Also, Kenny, you still owe me a race in Ninja Gaiden, so don't think you're getting out of it. Anyway, each team's day would start by coming in at their scheduled time. It would begin with a daily stand-up, where you'd talk about the queue size, any anticipated issues, any tooling outages, stuff like that. And everybody would take a seat in their cubicle and start taking tickets. And this is where I'm going to point out, probably not for the last time, that it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows working as a game master. And that's because while we were using one monitor to reply to and resolve tickets, we had a second monitor that was also used for research, looking up database entries or internal bug reports or quest steps. But also on that second monitor was something much less fun, a pair of colored boxes, one for your productivity score and one for your quality score. And mimicking the colors of WoW's item rarity system, the boxes would be colored green if you were doing okay, and purple if you were epic, and red if you were falling behind. When I worked at Blizzard, game masters were expected to resolve a minimum of 6 to 8 tickets every single hour. And if you fell below that number for too long of a time, you would get a firm ping from your team lead asking you what the holdup was. These boxes were the gamified versions of metrics or KPIs, but I promise you, the cute colored boxes did not make it any more fun to deal with. It was this constant, unyielding pressure that at basically any time, your boss could remotely view your screen and send you a message and jump on your case and go, 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 time is money, friend. It was not a nice feeling, and it definitely contributed to my own personal burnout, and I'm sure it did for loads of others as well. But yeah, besides the typical corporate pressures and overlords, the actual office environment was great. Game Masters got good perks, especially if you were a WoW player. Game time, copies of paid cosmetics, a ton of faction change codes, and realm transfer codes. And I know that when I was working there, I doled them out to my friend group a ton. I distinctly remember in 2011 when Skyrim came out. I came back one day from a lunch break to find my entire team playing Skyrim. Even though it was a non-Blizzard game, gaming was built into the DNA of that environment. And it was undeniably fun to work with people who are just as into the hobby as I was and I still am today. But anyway, let's step away from the Office Space vibes and turn our attention to the tooling, the mechanisms by which game masters actually action and process requests. And get ready, because game masters were using some pretty advanced tools.
Must be an on button somewhere. Press the apple thing.
Game master policies, chat violations. Quick disclaimer, I worked at Blizzard more than a decade ago, and the information in this section is almost certainly outdated. Please don't open tickets in 2024 or later disputing company policies based on the details shared here, because they've likely changed. The few remaining game masters are overworked, underpaid support staff, so please treat them well. Disclaimer complete. So let's get one thing out of the way. When I worked at Blizzard, 95% of any game master's day was not spent in-game. It was spent in a proprietary piece of software called Atlas Tools that did a couple important things simultaneously. Most important is that it could interface with game data in real time. So game masters didn't actually have to be in the game or looking at a game UI to actually have a chat conversation with a player. Instead, most of our conversations actually took place in a UI that kind of looked like AOL Instant Messenger from back in the day. If a player was AFK when we went to reach out about their petition, then we could send them an in-game mail with next steps or follow-ups. Additionally, a crucial function of Atlas Tools was that it could also interface with account data in real time. With just a couple clicks, it was very easy to look up the list of characters on an account, when they were created, what was in their inventory, their bank bags, their reputation standings, honor points, recent trades, chat logs, everything. And I say this to point out that something like half of all the issues that game masters received didn't even require us going into the game to resolve them. Can't figure out where to go for the next step of an important quest? We will chat with you and give you a hint. Can't figure out where you put that all-important RP item? We would give you exact coordinates. Bag 3, slot 12. And one such issue that definitely fits into this category is reports of violating or abusive chat. In fact, I can't count the number of times I got tickets that essentially just boiled down to, "That guy over there called me a bad word. Ban him!" And honestly, this is a pretty good opportunity for me to try and help demystify the penalty system for abusive chat, at least in Blizzard games. Because to this day, you can still find posts on Battle.net of people expressing confusion about how the penalty system works for ugly chat in their games. So let me break it down as I remember it, but keep in mind this was a decade ago. On its surface, every category of violation has its own sliding scale. Imagine thermometers separated into 4 or so tiers of escalating badness. You've got a thermometer for harassment, hacking, advertising, so on and so forth. For the purposes of this explanation, I'm going to talk about the scale that existed for inappropriate language. Starting at the bottom, anything that was a non-offense fit right in what we called severity 0. This included stuff that was basically rude or flippant or just basic cursing, as long as it wasn't particularly nasty or repeatedly targeting a single player. An example of a severity 0 infraction for abusive language could be someone just hanging out in Orgrimmar typing the F word in a normal context. Yeah, this kind of stuff would get reported from time to time, but it would very seldomly get action because players themselves choose to turn off the language filter. If you don't want to see naughty words, then don't turn it off.
And for gosh sake, watch your language.
Moving up a level in the inappropriate language scale, we get to words that are more hostile, more direct, and typically targeted repeatedly at a single player. Maybe the vulgarity is extreme in nature, or the volume goes so overboard that it is borderline bullying. And quick note, this is not a situation where 2 players are cursing each other out. That was actually a specific situation that game masters would refer to as mutual combat, and more often than not, it would result in no actions being taken. The mute and block buttons exist in the game for a reason, but if you, in your attempt to defend yourself, continue to egg somebody on or you insult them, it becomes very difficult very quickly to identify who the actual initial aggressor was. So avoid mutual combat if at all possible.
I hate you, Patrick.
I hate your stupid mount. Yeah, well, I hate your stupid mount.
Yeah, well, I hate you even if I didn't hate you.
But an actual severity 1 violation for inappropriate language would be 1 or more instances of a one-directional, targeted, hostile encounter. These kinds of situations aren't nice, but they're also not really the end of the world, so typically these kinds of reports would result in a warning for the offending player. Now, these last 2 levels of abusive chat are things that I don't necessarily want to talk about, but I feel compelled to for the sake of completeness and providing insight. The 3rd tier of inappropriate chat involved anything in the racial sphere, including slurs or attacking somebody based on the color of their skin, their ethnicity, stuff in that vein. If you were brazen enough to engage in this type of activity and a game master caught word of it, it would earn you an immediate vacation from the game. Blizzard does not want their games populated by this kind of hatred. And low-key, I would not be surprised if today there are automated systems in place to detect this kind of language. But alas, we have arrived at the final tier of inappropriate language in the world of Warcraft. This is language that if you choose to engage in it, it'll get you an instant and prolonged suspension from the game, if not outright getting your account perma'd. And that is racially charged calls of violence. Running around Orgrimmar and saying, "Let's round up," will get you into big trouble. In fact, these last 2 tiers of violating chat that we've talked about here are so prickly to Blizzard, they would typically escalate or jump those tickets to the front of the queue to get them actioned as quickly as possible. Please do not do them. Do not name your character these kinds of vile things as a joke. Blizzard support will not find it funny, and I promise they will not be lenient. And like I said earlier, this is just one scale, one thermometer for inappropriate chat. Harassment, sexual content, doxing, etc. Each one of these and more have their own sliding scales of penalties. But to circle back and try and tie a ribbon around some of the confusion that exists on this topic, how long a ban or a suspension is for really depends on the context of what you're saying or doing, and all I can say is that the worse a player decides to act, the bigger the ban hammer will be. Anyway, this is how the penalty system was structured when I worked there more than a decade ago. So now you know. Wasn't that just a really fun deep dive into policy? Happy holidays? GM Tools, Flags, and Mechanics 101. Anyway, while many, if not most, of the tickets that we received could be resolved within Atlas tools by simply chatting with players, there were still tickets from time to time that required us to either go into the game, observe something, take control of a character, so on and so forth. So here's a couple of the most common requests that actually resulted in game masters going into the game. First up, help, help! Oh my gosh, all my stuff is gone. I've just logged in and I'm super naked. This kind of ticket is the textbook case for a compromised account. When you start getting emails that your password's been changed or your account that was inactive has been banned, that's a big red flag that someone else has gotten access to your account and your characters. And before we go any further, I want to take a quick second to talk about the two different kinds of compromised accounts, because how they were handled by game masters was very different. The first, and by far the rarest situation, was an account that was compromised that was in active use. This is to say the account already had an active subscription, maybe the player was logging in on a regular basis, even raiding weekly. And then suddenly out of the blue, they log in, all their stuff is gone, they are naked in a major city. These types of compromises were pretty easy to verify, and Blizzard's tools allowed game masters to see at a glance breaks in consistent login patterns. Right? Like, it's obviously a red flag if a player has months or even years of logging in from Connecticut or Texas or wherever, and then suddenly there's one login from China or Russia. That is obviously a red flag. And what typically happens in those kinds of situations is that when the account is active, the person hacking the account knows they probably don't have too much time. So what they would do is they would run to the bank, or in unfortunate circumstances, the guild bank, grab everything they could and vendor it for raw gold. They would sell everything in the character's bags and their equipped gear for raw gold to vendors, and then immediately trade that gold to another character on another account, usually a compromised account. These hackers would then funnel that gold dozens, if not hundreds of times, in and out of player banks, in and out of guild banks. And eventually that pooled money would make its way to a character where it would sit for the purposes of RMT, real money trading or real money transactions. And I'm going to say more on RMT later in this video because trust me, it's important, and the things that I did and didn't observe on this topic at Blizzard really concern me. But just know that if the account was active and this activity was spotted quickly, then game masters were very likely to be able to roll back any of the illicit activity, restoring gear and gold and inventories, on the condition that there were activity logs showing this stuff. This is to say that if we could confirm the player had those items or that amount of gold prior to this other login taking place, then we could send them fresh copies and send them on their merry way. But I want you to keep in mind that this was the best case scenario for a compromised account. And that's because when I worked there, Blizzard didn't store activity logs for longer than 90 days. And before you freak out, just know that this kind of does make sense in a weird way, because if you think about all of the activity that goes on in WoW, every chat line, every trade, every transaction, every purchase, every movement of every character, there's just way too much data to try and store all that. It is a technical impossibility. But if somebody reached out to us quickly enough, we could usually see those log lines of trades and vendor transactions, and we knew as game masters what we needed to roll back. But if that activity happened more than 90 days prior, that was when we had real big problems. Sir, the logs are gone. I can't restore your 50 million gold because I can't verify you actually had 50 million gold. Them's just the breaks.
You're an inhuman monster! I said good day!
Which brings us to the second type of compromised account, which was much more heinous and unfortunately much more common. And this is what game masters refer to as zombied accounts. And the reason they're called zombied accounts is because they're being compromised from an inactive state. This is to say that the person who owns the account stopped playing World of Warcraft months or even years ago, and the hackers have gained access to their account by a password leak or access to their email system or one way or another. In these cases where hackers have access to these inactive accounts, they would use either game trial offers or one-off purchases of game time to reawaken them, to zombie them. Only in these cases, they don't have any reason to believe the player is jumping to get back into World of Warcraft, so they would do much worse than just vendoring their gear. No, in these cases, hackers would actually unlearn the character's professions, and then they would talent into gathering professions, such as mining or herbalism, and they would use those characters to bot farm those resources. And needless to say, they don't exactly care about using bots because they don't care if the accounts get banned. After all, they're not theirs anyway. But the point is that damage to these accounts and characters was often severe. And even more important is that it came with the reality that recent gameplay logs were not readily available. So it pains me to say this, but being honest with y'all, I genuinely can't count the number of times I would get a ticket from someone saying, hey, I tried to sign into WoW, but it looks like my account's been banned, only to investigate and find out they were zombied months, if not years prior, and that there was absolutely nothing we could do in order to try and verify what they had prior to that compromised activity. And yeah, Blizzard did have like starter packages that we could give players with, with some fresh equipment and a nominal amount of gold to get them back on their feet. But being real with you, like, rightly losing that much amount of time and investment in a character would be devastating. And oftentimes when I would get people approaching me with these kinds of situations and they were like, yo, I wasn't mining in herbalism, I would literally just take them at their words or even look at their achievements to try and figure out what professions they had. Anyway, returning to the original point that I was trying to make, releveling professions was one of the few things we couldn't do from Atlas tools. That was one of the rare situations where it was necessary for game masters to possess or hop onto that character and actually relevel their professions. And on the topic of restorations, there were some niche workarounds on this topic. I could talk all day about them. They involve realm transfers and all sorts of stuff, but I don't want to bore y'all with the details here. If anyone is curious, you're welcome to ask in the comments, and I'm happy to elaborate further on what was and wasn't recoverable. But the TLDR is that watching players lose months or years of investment into these characters was not a fun experience. I hated seeing purged logs, and I hated not being able to help people. And besides, I wanted to get revenge on the hackers. They've got the hacker. He's logging in from Russia, stealing everybody's stuff. Go get him, Toby! And since we're talking about actually logging into the game, I will go ahead and briefly describe what that UI looked like from the Game Master's point of view. First off, every single Game Master toon always spawned on Game Master Island. And before anybody asks, yes, I promise it is a real place. This player using spawn or geometry exploits to actually access Game Master Island accurately shows what it looks like. There is a single building and no NPCs and really nothing notable there at all. And yes, if we saw players actually there back in the day, they would get banned. So 10 out of 10, I don't recommend going. There's not a whole lot there to do. Anyway, I just want to point out that GM characters were not always the same race. Some of my characters on Realms were undead. Some were human. Because of the flags we had, the race itself didn't really matter. But interestingly enough, almost all GM toons, 99% of the time, are very, very naked. And that's because one of the GM flags that we had checked on pretty much all day, every day, was invisibility. And this is a mock-up of what the GM toolbox looked like, at least back when I worked there. No, I did not save actual screenshots of this because I don't think Blizzard's ninjas would have let me leave the office alive. But yeah, the basic toolbox included a list of flags with things like flight and collision and indestructibility, so on and so forth. And due to the invisibility flag, most GM characters were invisible 99.9% of the time they were in game. In fact, when I worked there, it was an actual policy that GMs were not allowed to show their characters without prior approval from a team lead. I think this is probably to cut down on requests or tickets from players asking to just see a game master, but it was a policy and we couldn't show our characters. And low-key, during the 2.5 years that I worked there, I can only count once or twice that I remember actually being allowed to show my GM character. And usually it was for issues like zone disruption or a lot of players exploiting a bug in a particular area. Anyway, other quick fun facts about GM toons. We could move around the world very, very quickly, instantaneously by using a command called WorldPort. And fun fact, developers have actually left the WorldPort command on by accident on PTR realms in the past. So players could just bamf to any location in the world they wanted to, including inaccessible locations by simply typing /WorldPort followed by a bunch of coordinates. So good job, developers. Definitely don't make that mistake again. And likewise, other types of issues that would actually require Game Masters signing into the game included, reports of, help, my character is stuck, I can't move out of this geometry, or I see a character below the geometry of the world mining resources, clearly hacking. These are things where we'd have to open the client and observe the player or hacker in question and then take the appropriate action. But between Atlas tools and the in-game client, most issues were resolvable, or at the very least comprehensible within a matter of moments. However, there was one type of issue that was not easily resolvable. An issue that every single game master I worked with hated with a fiery passion, myself included. And that was reports from players who had just completed a battleground or gotten an honorable kill, and they were claiming they didn't get their honor points. Let me be very clear. Blizzard's chat logs were very nice and very easy to read. Blizzard's trade logs were very comprehensible, and it was very clear to see who was getting what and what was taking place. But whatever dude designed Atlas Tools' PvP currency logs did a terrible job. Trying to read those log lines was like reading 14 points for this honorable kill and 13 points for this honorable kill, but with no clear total running throughout it. It was a massive pain to try and parse through. I vividly remember being in heated conversations with players where they would be like,
I didn't get my 32 honor points for this kill, fix it.
And I would have to spend an hour of my life parsing through these logs trying to figure out if there was actually even an error, and most of the time there wasn't. Oh my god, I'm doing such a bad job of explaining this. It's like If you worked at a grocery store and you were checking somebody out and you'd gotten through 13 or 14 items and then suddenly the customer was like, the total's wrong, the total is not correct, but you didn't have an easy way to check that. You had to manually pull out a calculator and start adding up the value of every single individual item only to find that the total was correct the whole time. Ugh, those tickets freaking sucked. But there were fun ones too. People who just wanted to chat with a game master or ask for help about a quest they were stuck on. Some of my favorite tickets were just me hanging out with a player for 30 minutes, watching them kill 8 boars for some stupid quest, and just chatting with them and hearing about their day. And pro tip, if a game master really, really liked you, they would send you an in-game mail after your conversation with a bunch of cookies. Wait, was that just me? Also, just to put this out there, for role-playing realms, we were fully expected to participate in that immersion and also roleplay ourselves. And because my name was Game Master Nildris, which sounded very cute old grandma-y to me, I totally leaned into that character. I would open my chats like, "The sky darkens as the ground beneath your feet begins to tremble. A cool fog rolls in around you as the scent of freshly baked cookies fills the air. You look up and find yourself standing in the presence of Game Master Nildris. Greetings, %N. I'm here to talk to you today about your petition. Do you have a moment?" %N was the autofill macro for whoever we were talking to, so if you were talking to someone named Joe, %N would autofill the name Joe. But you do have to be careful because every now and then you'd be talking to somebody with profanity in their name, and you didn't want to autofill that. Anyway, one time I remember I took a ticket on an RP server, and the player that I was talking to, I think he was reporting harassment or something, but when I was interacting with him, it became very clear very quickly that this person was leaning heavily into the troll RP. Like, the dude had the chat lines down and everything. I vaguely remember at the end of the chat, I was trying to wind things down, and I was like, "Thank you for your report, we will look into it and take any necessary steps." And I just remember the troll looked at me and he said, "Hey, you hurt the ones you love, man." And I'm role-playing an old grandma. I don't know how to reply to that. I'm not even very good at role-playing, so I just remember looking at him and being like, that's nice. Ugh, I'm so bad at role-playing. Anyway, there were a lot of aspects about the job that were fun. Stuff like GM jokes, which was basically just a big spreadsheet of jokes if we were ever asked by a player for a joke. The one that went viral more often than not would always be a player being like, GM, tell me a joke." And the GM would look at them and be like, "Your arena rating." And yeah, working for Blizzard, seeing WoW from behind the curtain, it was definitely an interesting experience. But in early 2012, everything changed for me forever. My relationship with the company changed forever because me and my friends and coworkers came into work one day and the worst came to pass. Layoffs. Blizzard lays off the game masters. Let me be clear, I have gone through layoffs at multiple big tech companies, and it is never fun. Watching people lose their jobs, or losing your job yourself, is not a fun experience when the executives that are making these decisions bring home millions of bucks a year, and the people that are getting laid off make pennies on the dollar. And I'm just going to say, the way Blizzard laid people off in 2012 was awful. On the day, my team came into work ready to start their normal shift. Our team was located in the back of the building by one of the side doors, so we came in this side door ready to go to our cubicles and ready to do our stand-up. But the moment we walked in, we were pulled aside, and managers were ready and sitting there telling us to go to one of 2 rooms. We had absolutely no idea that layoffs were happening, and we had not been prepared in any way. It is not an exaggeration to say that I looked into the eyes of my coworkers and friends, not knowing what kind of shakeup was about to happen. I got sent off to a large section in the cafeteria room, and I remember just sitting around at the tables with 30, 40 other game masters just looking at each other nervously, not knowing what was about to happen. And after half an hour, one of the managers came in and said, "Oh, hey, everybody in this room, y'all still have your jobs. And we just need to acknowledge, layoffs are happening right now, and your other coworkers are losing their jobs, but everybody in this room, you're still employed." And simultaneously, for the folks that were escorted out, they were not given any transparency. They were not given any insight into the decisions that had been made. To my knowledge, they were never informed of what metrics determined whether or not they lost their jobs. They didn't get a justification as they were escorted off the property. All they got was corporate ruthlessness. They weren't even allowed to say goodbye. And I talked to my friends after the fact, and they told me they weren't even allowed to go back to their desks to collect their belongings. Like, Blizzard had team leads or managers box up their stuff and send it to them later. But it just really upset me to see my friends who had poured so much passion and love for what they did into this company get treated so badly. And please, I don't want to hear about how it was good for the company or their sustainability or equitability or any other corporate buzzword. The reality is they made $4 billion in revenue that year, and they continue to trend up from that year on year afterwards. The stock numbers were happy. The shareholders were happy. The only people who got shafted by this decision were the workers and the players. And I really believe the players were the biggest loser in all this. Because by and large, the Game Masters were beloved by the fans. They were customer support that loved to engage and relate and geek out with passionate WoW players. But Blizzard didn't see enough value in it. And year after year, the pool of Game Masters continued to shrink until the point that they basically became a myth or a meme, depending on who you're talking to. And being completely real with you guys, I don't know anybody who still works there in a support role today. In the decade that followed, all of my friends moved on. And with the advent of AI and automated support systems, it would not surprise me at all to find out the Game Master role has been completely eliminated, or if it's just running on a skeleton crew. This situation makes me sad, because the relationship that Game Masters had with the community was a special one. But I'm not going to lie, it also makes me nervous for the future of the gaming industry when more and more we're removing the human element, not just from the support role, but the development role, the creation role. It is concerning to me that there may be algorithms out there right now rendering verdicts on player disputes. And don't get me wrong, I want companies to embrace new technology, but not at the expense of their employees, and not at the expense of their gamers. My vote would be bring back the Game Masters. I would challenge Blizzard to plant a flag in the ground and say, we're going to do support differently. We are not going to embrace automated support forms. I want them to deliver great experiences with the players in mind and not their shareholders. And I know that's naive of me. I know. But alas, let me tell you how this story ended, at least for me. About the day that I got fired. The moment that I turned in my badge and I walked out the doors of Blizzard forever. This is the story of how I got fired. So going into Diablo 3's launch window in May of 2012, I was already hella burned out. I had seen my friends laid off en masse just a couple months prior, and I promise I was thoroughly over the green, purple, and red boxes constantly coming down on me. And rather than do the mature thing and just communicate with my boss about how I was feeling, I decided to do something I shouldn't have. I figured out a very easy way to bypass Blizzard's ticket system altogether. Here's how I did it. So sometimes while a game master was working a ticket and, it was filed under a compromised account issue, they actually realize halfway through, oh, this is actually a different issue. It's a separate issue. I say this because one day in my burned out state, I realized that it was actually trivially easy to find compromised accounts by simply following compromised gold. It was really as simple as looking at high-value transactions of gold where no items were exchanged and little to no chat actually appears in the chat log. Typically, the character that's giving the gold away would be a very low-level character. They would sign on in a major city, hand over an exorbitant amount of gold to a buyer, and they would promptly log out. And I realized that if I just looked at the source of that gold, it would almost always lead me back to a guild bank that was being populated by fraudulent, compromised characters, where they're pooling money in as a resource that they had stolen off of compromised accounts. Essentially, it was very easy for me to identify plenty of zombied accounts. I would come in for 8 hours a day, and I would identify dozens, if not hundreds, of compromised accounts where all their stuff had been liquidated, all the gold had been sent off, and then I would just reclaim it all. I would go in and I would reclaim hundreds and hundreds of millions of gold from the WoW economy. And I just want to say, I did not do this flippantly or recklessly without actual sincere players in mind. I would double and triple check chat logs and IP addresses and login states. And if I had even a 1% chance of thinking that it was a sincere player, handing gold to their friend, of course I would take no action. But the sheer volume of these incidents was so many, and there were so many compromised accounts, I was able to spend 8 hours a day just doing this work. But this was obviously not what my boss wanted me to be doing. They wanted me to be in the general queue, helping people with quests, or, worst case scenario, trying to track down honor points, and I was over it. And after 2.5 weeks of doing nothing but saving zombied accounts, my bosses caught wind of what I was doing, and boy oh boy, I was in trouble. I got pulled into my manager's office above my team lead, and my manager went in on me. I got the biggest lecture of my entire life. He went in on me and said, oh, this gold you're taking out of the economy doesn't matter. This isn't what game masters should be focusing on. You think you're having an impact in the game, but you're not. And he was pissed because even though my numbers looked great, I was still closing 8 tickets a day, I wasn't doing the types of tickets that they wanted. And it is not an exaggeration to say that afternoon, when he's chewing me out in his office, he threw insults at me that still live rent-free in my head more than a decade later. I remember being in my early 20s, being nervous for being found out and being talked down to. And he was sitting on the side of his desk just scolding me. And I distinctly remember he said, like, you know, Clyde, you're too smart for your own good. And this is just going to ruin everything in your life. You know, you're always jumping ahead. You're not actually following the process. You're not doing things the way they should be doing. And this is going to ruin everything in your life. And I remember sitting there just kind of nodding along, sitting there in total silence while this guy ranted at me and took out all of his frustration on me. And after he was done lecturing me, you know, he told me, oh, we're going to put you on a performance plan. You know, this is going to be a written warning. And I just told him, look, dude, don't bother. Here's my badge. I'm done. I'm walking out of here. And I walked out and I never went back. I was done. I was burned out. And yeah, it was a very frustrating, humiliating experience for me. I mean, not entirely unearned. You know, I definitely wasn't doing the job they were paying me to do. And yeah, them's the breaks. Not a very fun conversation. On this topic, really quickly, I just want to say, human to human, really quickly, for anyone out there who works in an environment with KPIs or metrics or things like that, if you ever get yelled at by your manager or talked down to because your numbers don't look good, I just want to tell you, that's not about you. That's about them and their insecurities, right? Like, your numbers reflect badly on their numbers, and they're competing in their own little Hunger Games of corporate BS. So just try not to take what they say too seriously. You don't deserve to get talked down to. I certainly didn't back in the day, and it wasn't until many years later that I kind of grew up and realized, oh, this dude's just salty because now I've made his numbers look bad, so he's not going to get his, you know, holiday bonus or meh, whatever. But either way, you know, you probably didn't deserve it. I definitely didn't. Screw that noise. But what we've talked about today, what we've talked about up until this point, it leaves one really important question on the table. And maybe it's a question you've already got in the back of your head. That question is, does Blizzard even care about gold sellers? Look, throughout this video, I have done my absolute best to present the facts of my time working at Blizzard, their tools and their policies and my experiences. I have deliberately spoken from my personal point of view because I don't want to speculate and I don't want to throw random conjecture at the wall of what may or may not be the case today. But I am going to diverge from that pattern in this section really quickly because this is an important topic and I think it's something that deserves to be talked about. It's one of the most consequential, if not the most consequential issue when it comes to modern MMORPGs, and it is the topic of RMT and the effect that RMT has on players and the in-game economy. Over the 2.5 years that I worked at Blizzard, I was told multiple times in no uncertain terms there were dedicated teams out there handling RMT, handling gold buying and gold selling, as well as automated systems in place to try and tackle that stuff. But I'm going to be real with you guys. If those teams existed, I never once saw any evidence of them out there, and if they really are out there, I think they're doing a pretty bad job. I mean, anyone who's played WoW for even 5 minutes knows the volume of gold sellers and spam for gold sellers is through the roof. It was so bad in 2011 that any game master could literally spend their entire day, their entire shift doing nothing but tracking down compromised accounts and reclaiming gold off of gold sellers. I know because I did that for 2 weeks. And this is where I would like to offer my personal opinion. Not a fact, not a press release by Blizzard. This is just me as a gamer offering my own personal speculation about the situation. I personally believe that Blizzard doesn't as aggressively attack the problem of RMT because it actually keeps players, oftentimes whales, invested in their games. It keeps people buying WoW monthly subscriptions or invested in the WoW token economy in-game. I just want to say, it is laughably easy to buy gold in WoW. There are accounts that sit in spam websites in every single major city. If you Google buy WoW gold, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of websites that will come up that will instantly sell you gold no matter what realm you're on. And if Blizzard wanted to, they could shut that whole circus down. They have the tools. We know they have the tools. They had them more than a decade ago. But anecdotally, as a game master, I never really saw this type of activity actioned, at least not en masse or at the scale that it absolutely needed to be. And the really sick thing about this situation, the thing that frustrates me the most, is that by not tackling RMT as aggressively as they could, it directly emboldens hackers to compromise more accounts because that's their primary method of acquiring gold that they're going to turn around and they're going to sell. It encourages people to keep buying zombied accounts on these black markets. It is my personal opinion that by not tackling RMT as aggressively as they should be, they are putting their own players at risk. Anyway, the most important thing you gotta know, the thing that's most important for you to be, oh gosh, wow, give me 1 second. I need to go get some eggnog. Give me 1 sec. Eggnog, time to get me some eggnog. Yummy, yummy eggnog. Huh? You! What are you doing here? This video isn't even about you!
Shut yourself a righteous mouth.
I don't care what your stupid videos about, Clyde. I'm about to sell a whole lot of Nintendo Switches for the holiday season and a bunch of amiibos too. Huh? I'm gonna need you to tell everyone on the internet that Nintendo is their friend. Over my dead YouTuber body. Oh, I thought you might have said that, so I brought this. No, anything but that. No. Say so long to your free will, Clyde. No.
Yeah.
Ow. Nintendo is a great company. The Power lawsuit is legitimate, and all who say otherwise are pokey haters.
Yes, say it, Clyde. Tell them Nintendo is your friend.
They don't just make great Joy-Con hardware. Nintendo is your...
Say it, you pathetic YouTuber. Say it now.
Nintendo is not your friend! Anyway, y'all, I just want to say thank you. 2024 was an absolutely sick year for this YouTube channel. We had so much fun. We made so many memes, so many skits, and I just had an absolute blast getting to do it with all of y'all. And I just wanted to take a moment and say thank you for the comments, thank you for the support, thank you for the critical feedback, thank you for all of it. I sincerely hope that wherever you are on the other side of the screen, that you get to spend the holidays with friends or family or loved ones, and you get to kick back and you get to play some awesome video games. And likewise, thank you to our Patreon subscribers. I genuinely could not do this without y'all. And yeah, 2025 is going to be an exciting year. New hardware, new software, new drama, new memes, and I'm so grateful to be able to hang out with y'all and talk about it. So please just remember that no matter what happens, gaming companies are not your friend. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, whatever you celebrate, wherever you are, happy holidays. 2024, out of here.